Hey everyone, welcome to the Simbotics seminar series. This is a series of seminars put on by Team 1114 Simbotics, and we're here just to try and teach teams about FIRST. We started doing these seminars back in 2005 locally on the campus of the University of Waterloo, and for the last few years, we've been doing them at various schools and various presentations, and this is the first time that we're taking it live for everyone to see. So we're hoping that people tune in. We're hoping we're hitting a wide array of topics that you guys are going to enjoy. And today's the first seminar. It's on running a team. I'm just going to give you the schedule for the next few weeks. After this week, next week will be a seminar on strategic design, which is my favorite seminar and a lot of fun. The following week, on the 15th, we'll be doing one on scouting. The 22nd, we'll be doing one on drivetrain design. And on the 29th, we'll be doing one that actually many people haven't seen, but it's one that is pretty important, on the Chairman's Award. So that one's got a lot of interesting tips in there. And then going into November, we'll be doing a couple on our results from the first beta test. So not going to waste your time or anything. We're going to go right into the main topic right here. So just one moment. We'll get started. Here we go, running an FRC team. So this seminar is going to go over some of the basics on how to structure your team and how to get yourself through the 6-week build season. The target audience for this is not just rookie teams, but any team who's been around for a few years and is just trying to figure out how to shape their team in the best possible way. Everything that we're going to talk about here is just one approach to run a team. There's a lot of different ways, and I think the approaches that we talk about today are a little bit modular, so you can pick and choose what you want to do. Something that's really, really important and we're going to touch on a lot is that an FRC team doesn't have to do everything. There's so many facets to FIRST and so many different avenues you can approach. You don't need to try and do everything. You need to really tailor what you do based on the resources you have available to you. So you want to look at things like your team size, the amount of experience you have, the amount of mentors you have, the budget, the shop space. Look at all those things and try and tailor this program to be the way you want it to be. FIRST is really, really neat in that it can be a small program for a team of like 10, 15 kids, but you can find dynamic and engaging ways to fulfill students on a team of 150 or so. So always keep that in mind when you're trying to figure out how you're going to run your FRC team. I'm Carter, the Candidates of Apathy. Here's a little blah, blah, blah about me. Basically, I've been doing FIRST for about 17 years, and I've been with Team 1114 since 2004. We've had a moderate amount of success in that time. Thing we're most proud of is we were winners of the Championship Chairman's Award in 2012, entering the FIRST Hall of Fame. I gave a TED Talk a couple years ago. If you're so inclined, Google my name on YouTube and search my name on YouTube. It's weird that Google's become a ubiquitous word for search, but anyways, check it out. You might be interested. For my day job, I work for Innovation First International and Vex Robotics, and one of the biggest things I do is I'm the chairman of the game design committees for Vex Robotics. So I design the games that are played in the Vex Robotics competition and the Vex IQ Challenge. So I've got a lot of experience with competitive robotics in that way. So the outline of today's presentation, we're going to split up into 3 areas. The first is on how to organize your team. The second is on how to manage the 6-week build season. And the third, before I used to talk about a lot of miscellaneous topics, but I decided to kind of pare that down into one important one that always comes up. I get this question so often from people, but how do you select who's on your drive team? So I decided to turn that into a section of the seminar. So team organization. Think about the scope of what you're trying to do in FRC. You have 6 weeks to build a 120-pound robot that's going to do some complicated tasks. This is not an easy challenge. This is not a simple science fair project. It is a multifaceted project that's going to involve a lot of students, mentors, and parents. And it needs to really run like a business. There's just too much to do to just kind of run it as if it's a garage project. It's a lot more than that. Work needs to be filtered down through a hierarchy because there's just too much for one person to do. You can't have this be a project where like 3 kids work in a garage and try and build this robot. You need to have a system and a structure in place to really optimize what you're going to do. What sets FRC apart from any other program out there is that it's not just a program about students. It's a partnership between students and mentors. Students have the opportunity in this program to work alongside mentors to learn about what the real world's like. And that makes FIRST unique because it's such a cool experience for students. You can just learn so much. So you really need a strong partnership between students and mentors. And when we talk about partnership, it's going in both directions. The mentors are helping the students, but the students are also helping the mentors. When you break your team down into sub-teams, it's really important to have people responsible for every area. It's important for two reasons. One, there's a sense of ownership over each area, so things in that area are more likely to be completed. But number two, it's important to give students fulfilling leadership opportunities to help them grow into the types of future leaders of tomorrow that we're looking for. Should you have student mentors, student leaders of a sub-team, or mentor leaders? Well, frankly, both is ideal. You kind of want to have a mentor who is kind of in charge of the mentors and a student who's kind of in charge of the students, and then they can work together to plan things. So let's look at a sample org chart. Again, there's so many different ways to do this, but this is the kind of way I see it. It's a very general format where you have your central leadership and the team is kind of split into two areas, the engineering team and the business team. Now, don't think of these as boxes that you're in one box or the other. Think of them as spheres that collide and intersect almost like a Venn diagram. So just because someone's involved in the engineering side doesn't mean they can't be involved in the business side. When you break down the engineering side, there's three main sides: design and fabrication, controls, and strategy. On the business side, for a first team, I'd like to see it broken down into finance, marketing, and then a special section for the awards. So for the first 20 minutes of this presentation, we're going to walk through the different sub-teams that we've outlined here, talk about what they do and how you might set them up on your team. The engineering side, this is the robot team. This is the team that's going to be responsible for seeing your robot from conception to actuality. The engineering leader, the person who's in charge of this, is the overall authority when it comes to all robot-related decisions. This means this is the person who's going to be the yay or the nay on any sort of argument, any sort of major decision that has to be made. Robot building, a 6-week build season, can be contentious at times, so it's important to have a strong leader who can help gain consensus amongst everyone that he or she's working with. But not just gain consensus, sometimes they'll have to provide firm direction, and it's a very important role. They also have to coordinate between the three engineering sub-teams to ensure that the areas of overlap are taken care of. Now, what we talked about earlier with design and fabrication, strategy, and controls, it's easy to look at those as three separate, discrete pods. However, so many things interact there, and the overall engineering leader needs to be responsible for the interactions and make sure communications happen between these areas. For example, if at the beginning of the year you said, well, we need to have an autonomous mode on this robot. Well, who's responsible for that? Well, actually, all three sub-teams are. The strategy sub-team is going to set the priority and decide what that autonomous mode is going to do. The design and fabrication team is going to make the robot that's going to execute that, but more so, if you want to get to the nitty-gritty of it, they're going to be making room and mounting the sensors that are going to be responsible for collecting data during that autonomous mode. And then the controls team is obviously going to be integrating the sensors, programming them, and testing them. But there has to be interaction between all three. It's a really easy trap to fall into to think that, oh, autonomous mode, that's just for the software guys. They'll figure it out. But you can never have a strong autonomous mode without proper integration between the strategy team, the design team, and the controls team. So let's look at some of those sub-teams within the engineering sub-team. Design and fabrication. This is the group of students and mentors who are going to be responsible for the mechanical design and the build of the robot. They basically are in charge of making sure the robot does what it's supposed to do. You often break this sub-team down into smaller areas. Now, this is what I talked about at the very beginning when you say, oh, well, my team's really small. I don't know if I could break my design team down. Well, maybe if your team is small, it can just be the design and fabrication team and they're responsible for everything. If you're one of those teams out there who has 50 kids, you might want to say 6 of you are on the drivetrain, 7 of you are on the intake, and another 8 of you are on the shooter. These are both acceptable ways to do it. You just kind of have to figure out how you want to break it down based on what resources you have available. The design and fabrication team needs to take directives from the strategy team. We'll talk about the strategy team in a moment, and then next week's webinar we're going to talk heavily about them. But the strategy team is going to dictate the priorities and dictate what is being built. They're the ones who are going to do the analytics, analyze the game, and then say, okay, we want to focus on these 3 areas, design and fabrication. Let's get a robot up that does that. The design and fabrication team is also very crucial at competitions because they're going to be responsible for the maintenance of the robot, i.e. they're going to be your pit crew, and of course the upkeep as it goes on. So this is a very important group. However, some people kind of think that this is the entirety of a first team. I think a lot of rookies who come in just assume that this is all that goes on. You just got to build that robot. But there's so much more, and that's why we have these multiple sub-teams. This is a crucial part of the team. However, it's not the end-all and be-all. The strategy team. They are responsible for the strategic design of the robot, i.e. determining what the robot should do. They need to analyze the game to determine the game strategy. Again, strategic design, there's a whole seminar on this coming next week, so I don't want to talk too much about it now, but it's basically they are setting the specifications for the robot. They are setting out what it's going to do. They're going to try and figure out the best way to play the game. When you get to the competition, these are the people that are responsible for match planning, i.e. coming up with your strategies for your matches, and the execution of these plans. The drivers and the coach have to be a part of this team because they're so integral to everything that happens at the competition and within practice. A sub-team within strategy is often the scouting and analytics team. This is the team who will be gathering information about your potential opponents and partners to help decide on match plans and help determine what you're going to do in alliance selection. They're basically going to watch every match, collect meaningful data, and analyze it to try and give help and advice to the drive team to figure out how the team's going to progress throughout the competition. This is a great sub-team, the whole strategy thing, for students who might not seem like robot people. It's very, I say this a lot, it's very easy to fall into the trap. It's very easy to fall into the trap because there's so many traps and pitfalls involved in taking on the FRC challenge. But it is very easy to fall into the trap that you're only going to try and recruit kids to your team who know a lot about building robots, kids who are good with screwdrivers and like to sit in their basement and program. First is so much more than that. One, you're not really changing culture if you're only bringing in people who are already into STEM. That's strike one. But number two, if you want your team to succeed, you want to get the best of the best on your team. And if you're only going to limit yourself to a small sliver of your high school, you're just going to be missing so many brains and so many unique ideas who are going to help people who could help you succeed. So the strategy section is a great way of luring in people who might see robots, oh, that's kind of weird, but hey, I really like watching sports, because what the strategy team does is no different than what a football coach does, what a baseball manager does, and like what sports fans are doing every weekend when they're watching games. So it's a neat side of things. I'm very passionate about strategy because it's what I got to first when I was in high school. I thought robot kids were weird and stupid. I didn't think they were stupid, but I definitely thought they were weird. But you know, a teacher told me, it's like, hey, I think you'd like this. You're really into sports. The strategic stuff might appeal to you. I thought he was crazy. I walked in and I was like, wow, this is actually really neat, and it totally changed my life. So just saying, you have the opportunity to change other people's lives out there and really, you know, make the world a better place and all that happy stuff. The controls team. This is the group that is responsible for taking a mechanically sound robot and making it work. You know, some people call them the smoke and magic team, but they're the ones who take the physical robot and create motion out of it. They'll be doing the wiring of the robot, installing and designing sensors, and of course the software. A lot of people kind of think of controls as just software and programming, but controls is really the integration of electrical hardware and software. So they'll be responsible for writing all the code that allows the drivers to interface with the robot. Or in the case of the autonomous mode, the code that allows the drivers not to interface. This is not easy stuff. It can be very complicated, but there's a lot of people who are very passionate about this stuff who are up for the challenge. And I think a lot of teams have a hard time understanding the controls team because, you know, it's easy to understand what the mechanical team does because you see it and it's very physical. But sometimes it's hard to understand what your programming team does because they often work in a black box and you don't necessarily see the results as a physical sort of result. But absolutely crucial. They are a huge differentiator between a bad team and an average team, and also an average team and a good team. And the stuff's not easy, so it's important to work on this early, get a lot of practice in, and recruit hard. the controls team must be able to communicate well with the other engineering subteams. Again, because a lot of the stuff that they do seems to be all done in a black box, it's easy for the controls team to be isolated from the rest of the team and kind of working on their own. And it's okay for them to work on their own to a certain degree, but they have to be able to communicate what they're doing, let people know when there are problems. Otherwise, no one's going to really understand what's happening under the hood of the robot. Now over to the business side. We talked about the engineering side and creating the robot and all, but the business side is often the lubrication to the system, where if you have a mechanical system but you have no oil in it, it'll cease to operate. Without a high-functioning business team, the whole engineering side will cease to operate because there will be no money to make it go. It is often overlooked and neglected. However, this is the team that allows the engineering side to function. It also can do a lot to bring recognition to the team. When we talk about FIRST, the mission of FIRST is to help change society and change culture to a point where science and technology is more recognized. A lot of this is done via outreach. The business side of the team is very responsible for this stuff. This is a great opportunity to expose students to science and technology. It's also a great opportunity to expose kids who are very into engineering to the business side of the world that they're going to need if they want to be very successful engineers in the future. So the finance team is the first side. At first I was going to talk a lot about fundraising in this presentation, and then I realized I don't actually know much about fundraising, and I'd just kind of be talking out of my ass if I was. So there are a lot of people out there who are a lot better at this stuff than I am, but fundraising is super important for FIRST. I urge you to seek out resources on this stuff because FIRST is not a cheap program. It arguably might be the most expensive extracurricular program out there. So you need that funding and stuff. But the finance team is responsible for managing the team budget and the team's business plan. If your team creates a nice documented business plan, there's actually an award for it now. Really cool that FIRST is recognizing this, the Entrepreneurship Award. I mean, that award always existed, but now there's an official plan, an official way to submit your business plan. Within the finance team, aside from the finance team, the business side has another big aspect, which is the marketing side of it, who are responsible for getting publicity for your team both within your community and at competitions. So many other competitions that exist out there for students, you know, it's kind of like a science fair. You just walk in, you know, you wear whatever you're wearing and you go in. But a FIRST team walks in like a NASCAR team. Everyone's decked out in their uniforms, and there's, you know, there are sponsor decals everywhere. The marketing team is responsible for making this stuff happen. So a sub-team within marketing is what I like to call the graphics team. Some people call it the media team. But they're going to be responsible for establishing your team branding, the team identity, via logos, the apparel. They're going to create banners for you, signage, and promotional materials to really help you spread the word of what your team is doing. The social media group, they're going to be responsible for maintaining a web presence. It's really weird because when I first made this presentation, my notes for this were back in 2005 when social media didn't really actually exist. So that's a weird kind of twist, and it's neat how FIRST evolves and that stuff. But they'll be responsible for your website, your Facebook page, your team Twitter page, your Instagram page, your Pinterest, your Snapchat, your whatever. You don't need to have all of those things. I don't know why an FRC team would have a Snapchat. That's a little odd, but hey, some teams want to do it. But you want to figure out what avenues are best for you to spread the word of your team and use them effectively. I know in 1114 we have a very strong Facebook and Twitter presence, and we use that to promote things like today's webinars. So this is how we can get the community know what 1114 is doing. You're going to become very proud of your team and proud of your team's accomplishments. You know, when you build a really cool robot that does neat stuff, you're going to want to make a video about it. How do you promote it? Well, you'll promote it via your Facebook and via your Twitter. And so many FIRST teams are networking with each other on social media. You know, one team posts a link of a video, and then all of a sudden, you know, like 2,000, 2,500 impressions in 24 hours. So that's really neat stuff. But this is something that you really want to have a group of people specifically attending to. Community outreach. I hate the phrase, oh, FIRST isn't just about the robots, because it really demeans what we're trying to do here, and the robots are absolutely central to everything that happens in FIRST. However, there are a lot of other things that go on, and one of the most important things is using the robot to help generate interest in FIRST and its STEM education within your community. And a lot of this happens in outreach. FIRST teams are constantly giving demonstrations at public venues. They are finding their ways onto TV shows, into commercials. They are appearing, that people are building robots to, hug kids at hospitals. It's crazy the amazing cool stuff that FIRST teams do. And if you have a big team or you're a veteran team, you should be jumping into these areas. You should be doing outreach. And this is all under the envelope of marketing. So there's a lot of neat things that can be done here, but it essentially comes down to spreading the word of FIRST within your community and giving back to the community. The awards sub-team. Actually, back to this. All this outreach stuff, it ties into the Chairman's Award, which is the highest honor that FIRST bestows on a team, which goes to the team which has done the most to change the culture towards one that FIRST is trying to achieve. And the 5th presentation that we're doing on October 29th is on the Chairman's Award. We'll talk in detail about this. We'll talk a little bit about this in this next section, but outreach is very tied into that because FIRST rewards it with a very prestigious award. The awards sub-team needs to be its own sub-team, especially if you're going to try and submit for a lot of these awards. Most FIRST awards do not require submission, but even the ones that don't, having a handout or a display, like if you want to win a technical award, like the Quality Award or the Driving Tomorrow's Technology Award, it's good to have a handout or a display in your pit with strong team branding. The awards team will create this. The awards team will do your chairman's submission. There's so much to talk about chairman's. I can't even possibly wrap it up in this presentation, but it's a very cool award. Read up on it, tune back in for the presentation on the 29th. The Woody Flowers Award is an award that goes to the mentor who's done the most effective job of communicating to their students. This is a nomination that's written by students for their mentors, and that's something that every team should be doing because every team has at least one mentor who's pretty awesome. The Dean's List Award. This is an award that it actually offends me when teams don't submit because every team has amazing students. This is an award that should be, the team will pick 2 students and they'll nominate the student for the best student leadership and excellence in what they've done first. So every team should be nominating people for this. Now the awards sub-team, your students on your awards sub-team shouldn't be working on this one because it's going to be done by the mentors to nominate a student, but on large teams, students can have a lot of input and they can help their mentors out on this. And of course the entrepreneurship award for the business plan that we talked about earlier. So that's a lot about sub-teams, and we just went through a lot of stuff. And some people might say, hey, that org chart you had has more sub-teams than we have students. That's fair. Like, it is a lot. You don't have to do everything. In your first year, or if you're just a team that only has like 13 kids, you might say, hey, we're not going to do the awards side of things this year. We're going to stay away from that. Totally okay. Or you might say, we don't need a specific team to handle graphics. You know, we have a logo, and that's just kind of what we're going to go with. That's okay. You don't need to do everything. I see a lot of FIRST teams struggle because they try and do too much. And it's more important to focus on the things that you need to do as opposed to spreading yourself thin. You want to be awesome at a few things as opposed to mediocre at a bunch of things. And that really applies when we talk about robot design, and that's heavy in the strategic design seminar next week. It's really important to try and have a mentor for each sub-team that you do decide to have, because that way the students are being guided along in the process. You know, your mentors can be anyone. They can be industry professionals. They can be parents. But there's a lot of expertise in your community. You want to try and draw that in, because FIRST teams operate best when there's a partnership. So it really strengthens what you're trying to do. Also, I talked about this a little bit earlier, but don't just restrict your team to techies. There's a lot of different skill sets. Like we said at the very beginning, running a FIRST team is like running a big business. Well, businesses have a wide variety of skill sets. You need that for a successful team. This is really, really important. Again, the mission of FIRST is to try and change culture. We're trying to impact as many people as possible. So if you go into your high school of 2,000 people and you just kind of approach the 100 kids who are very interested in science and technology already and say, hey, this is a team for you, and you don't approach those other 1,900, you're missing out. You are missing the big picture. You want to get a great cross-section of your school. You want to get as many different skill sets in. It's a lot like the Breakfast Club. You want to have, you want to have your brain, your jock, your freak, your geek. You want to have them all together on this team, and they'll come together and they'll create something really special, not just a little speech at the end of detention. Okay, so we've created a team. We've done sub-teams and whatever. Now, let's talk about managing the build season. Let me just check the time here. Oh, 9:25. Sorry, I just got a weird identity theft email. Oh, someone else logged into our Twitter account. I'm assuming it's someone on our team. But yeah, so managing the build season. The build season is short. It is 6 weeks and 3 days. Task of building a robot is difficult. It takes a long time. To cram that giant task into your 6 week and 3 day build season takes planning and management. For pretty much every high school student, this is going to be the largest project you have ever undertaken in your life. For some mentors will walk in and have never worked on anything this big or with this crazy of a timeline. It is very intense. So you have to manage it carefully, and you have to set deadlines and try your best to stick to them. I'm going to present a timeline here. I don't want people to get scared of this timeline. I don't want people to think that this timeline is for every team. Different teams will have different ways of structuring your build season. This is just one sample that can be modified to suit what your team does. Talked about it once, talk about it again. What you do in first is determined by your resources. How many students you have, how many mentors you have, how much money you have, how much shop experience you have, etc., etc. These factors will determine how things are done in your build season. So this is a sample timeline, but it's a timeline that does seem to work for a good amount of teams. The beginning. Let's start at the very beginning. A good place to start. Sorry, sound of music. Okay, week 1, brainstorming. The first 4 days, again, I'm going to say this disclaimer now. I'm not going to stop saying it because it gets annoying. All these dates can vary. This isn't like a universal sort of thing. But for this timeline, we're going to say 4 days for brainstorming. What brainstorming means is you take your manual, you open it, and you read it from cover to cover. And then you analyze the rules, and you try and figure out what your robot's going to do. When we talk about day 5, a design freeze. The design freeze is not that you have to know exactly every nitty-gritty piece of detail about the robot, but you want to have an idea of what it's going to look like. Design freezes are a weird thing to talk about because this is where your build season schedule floats the most. Some teams who, how can I put this? The teams who feel they're going to need the most time to work on their robot should freeze their design early. So that means if you're a rookie team, you don't want to spend 2 weeks brainstorming. You want to freeze early. And if that means you have to choose a simpler design because you didn't explore every possibility, that's a good thing. Because a simpler robot, you have more chance to get it done, more chance to practice, and you will be able to execute that robot better. Veteran teams can let their design freeze time slide a little bit longer because they have an idea of what they're going to do and they can turn things around a lot faster. But it's important to have a design freeze. Otherwise, if you don't, it'll be easy. You'll find yourself in week 3 or week 4 and you're still not sure of what you're doing and you haven't chosen a path. Because the build season's very short, like, you just need to pick an avenue and go down it. This is very contrary to most advice you're going to get in your life because you want to take a lot of time to make important decisions. That's very, very true. However, when you're this resource limited, and by resource limited I mean time limited, you need to pick early and then hit that road running. Otherwise, it's easy to get far behind. In those first, after you do your brainstorming, mechanism prototyping is very important because it's easy for the brainstorming team to say, hey, we do score frisbees in the high goal. Great, that's an important task that needs to be done, but you now need to figure out how to manipulate frisbees. You need to figure out how to do this stuff before you can kind of finalize and freeze the specific robot design. So it's important to prototype. It's important to test things out. This is where so much of the learning process goes on. I know there's a lot of teams that just kind of say, okay, we want to shoot frisbees, we're going to use 2 wheels to do it, and let's just bang, let's go into it. The prototyping phase is so valuable because it allows for experimentation and that true scientific method, you know, of testing them at, saying, okay, we want to shoot frisbees and we know we want to shoot them 13 feet into an 8x8 box. Well, you build different prototypes and you test the efficiency of them. You record the efficiency. You try and figure out what's best. That's science at its finest. You want students to be able to go through this process. Mentors, even if you know the answer of what's going to work best, sometimes you don't want to give that answer to the students because you want them to go through this prototyping process. That being said, the build season is only 6 weeks. Don't waste people's time with needless prototyping if you already know the answer. Like, you do want to get things done. In terms of your design freezes, prototyping also determines a lot of when you're going to do your design freezes. If early prototypes work very quickly, then you might come to design freeze earlier. But please be careful about your design freezes. If you wait too long, you'll get into trouble. I think most teams are better off freezing early and then maybe missing something kind of cool as opposed to being late with your design freeze and showing up a competition with a robot that doesn't work yet, or actually rushing the actual fabrication of the robot. While this is all going on, the mechanism prototyping, you need to be building that drive system. For most teams, well, every team gets the option to have a kit bot put in their kit of parts. So they'll have a drivetrain that they can build right away on day one. That's a really good idea for most teams because you can hit the ground running and get that drive system done in a couple weeks, which is very important as we see what's coming up next. Week 2, from days 8 to 21, once you're done your prototyping, you want to start building your mechanisms. You want to do that in tandem with your drivetrain because a lot of the times your mechanisms will have to interact with your drivetrain. Programmers need to start programming early, i.e. in week 2. They should be building a test board just to kind of test what they're doing. Hook up some Victors, hook up some motors, make sure you can make them spin, make sure this stuff's happening. So you don't want the first time for motors to be spinning to be when they're installed on the robot. You want to get this stuff tested early because the sooner you test, the sooner you can fail and the sooner you can fix it. You will fail during the first build season. Every team fails. It's important to fail early and fail repeatedly so you can figure out what the failures are and figure out how to not fail when you get to competition. Okay, here's a crazy goal. I think teams, for the most part, should have their drive system done by day 14, 2 weeks in. If you can't get your drivetrain done in 2 weeks, you need to think about why you can't. Because, again, every team gets a kit drivetrain that they can build even on the first day. So why are you taking longer to do this? I know a lot of teams want to go custom, and that's a really cool thing, but if you're going to be later with your drive system, with your drivetrain, it creates a lot of other cascading problems in terms of the programmers don't have as much time, you have less time to integrate your subsystem and scoring mechanisms, and you have less practice time. So I know a lot of teams are going to see this and be like, that's unreasonable. And I'll be completely honest, 11.14 hasn't had a moving drivetrain for day 14 in the last few years. Now that's for different reasons because of the way we do our fabrication and outsourcing. However, it's important to have something moving. Now what we do on 11.14, we may not have our competition or practice robot drivetrain going, but we absolutely will have a defense robot drivetrain going by day 14. So there's something driving. There's also an emotional factor to this. As much as we say, okay, with the build season being short, the first couple weeks can get boring, and students can become very dejected if they don't see anything tangible. The first time you have something move that gets people really excited, and that really brings some more life into the team and creates some more energy that you'll need to survive the 6-week build season. Now, if you do get your drivetrain done by day 14, hey, day 15, week 3, you can start testing your autonomous modes, because your programmers, as we talked about earlier, should have started pseudocoding, and hopefully they're ready to deploy some code. If you have a drivetrain, can the programmers make it drive for 2 seconds and then stop? That's a good starting point. Can they make it turn 90 degrees? Can they make it drive in a straight line? These are things that you don't need the rest of the robot. You don't need to be able to shoot frisbees into a goal yet. But let the programmers just work with the drive base. Okay, the end. So this, again, is a crazy timeline. It talks about trying to have the robot done at the end of week 4. If you can do this, you're going to be in a really, really good spot. And when we talk about done, we don't mean like ready to go in the bag. We mean the first iteration is done, because that will give you 2 weeks and 3 days to fail. Because I don't know about teams that you've been on. Every team that I've ever been on, the first time you run the robot, things just don't work, and things are just kind of like a mess. You need time to fix them. Design is an iterative process. So you want to be able to test things, be like, oh, that's not working the way I want to, improve it. Test again, improve it. Test again, improve it. The best teams get done early and go through this testing process in the last couple weeks of build season. Most teams kind of get done around day 42 or day 43, get a little bit of testing in, but they really do most of their testing during the competition season. And they will be behind the teams who finished early. I can't overstate this. It is so important to be done early, because it means more time to work on autonomous modes, more time to test and improve, and more time to practice. Practice drivers make bad robots win, and unpracticed drivers make good robots lose. Practice is crucial. The sooner you get done, the sooner you can practice. It's an aggressive schedule, and it's really geared towards teams who want to simplify. But the simplest robot is usually the best solution. Well, that's not true. That's a BS platitude. But simple can win. And just, yeah, keep it simple, stick to this sort of timeline, and amazing things will be happening. Also, by getting done early, you will have time to take weight off the robot, because estimating the weight of a robot is a difficult skill that very few people are good at. So you want to leave yourself time to figure out how you're going to get rid of those 5 pounds you're going to come in overweight. Tips. Never let perfectionism get in the way of getting a good job done. Perfectionism is deadly in first. You can't build a perfect robot in 6 weeks. You can't. It's just not plausible. Your robot doesn't need to last forever. Remember, most teams are going to play 50 matches on the season at 2.5 minutes each. We're talking about, like not even 2 hours of drive time. Well, then you factor in your practice and whatever, but it's still. A lot of people try and build these robots so they're bulletproof, but they can last forever. These robots do not need to last forever. Don't overbuild them. Don't let perfectionism destroy you. Things don't need to be perfectly beautiful. Your powder coat can have scratches, although I know of some teams who don't like that sort of thing. But if you try and perfect robots, like, I get why you want to have this ideal of perfectionism, but I'd rather, instead of having a perfect robot, I'd rather have a blue banner. If you spend more time tweaking and more time getting things right as opposed to perfect, you're going to do a lot better. The 6-week and 3-day build season is super intense, but it's going to require crazy hours of the students and mentors on your team. But there are more important things than first. For all you high school students who are listening, your grades really do matter. I know it's one of those things that a lot of people like to say, oh, well, you have great extracurriculars. You can get into any school you want. They're lying. Grades are by far the most important thing to any school. If you let your grades slip because of first, you are doing yourself a disservice. It will be harder to get into the top schools, and when you go to a top school and you graduate, it's a much easier to get a high-paying job. Literally, if you let your grades slip in high school, you can cost yourself money down the road. And I think most of you are probably going to ignore this. If someone told this to me when I was 16, I would have ignored it too. But, trust me on this one. Your marks are really, really important. You cannot let them slip. First is cool. First is awesome. I know you don't want to let your team down, but you've got to make that your priority. And mentors, please make sure your students are making school a priority, because that's your job. I talked about resources and how the schedule is just a sample. Again, one thing that can really change the schedule is if you're going to have a practice robot. If you have a practice robot, and for those who are wondering what this means, is some teams will build 2 robots simultaneously. That way, when they bag their first robot, they can practice with their second robot. If you're going to have a practice robot, your schedule changes, because you can afford to finish right at the on-bag day, because then you could do all your tweaks on your practice robot and then install the upgrades on your competition robot at competition. So that might sound like, oh, well, that's easy. Of course I'm going to do that. It's going to allow me to stretch my timeline out. Of course I want a practice robot. Practice robots are really, really hard. They're resource intensive, and they should not be undertaken unless you have a huge amount of resources to do it. There's a myth out there that all the best teams have practice robots. That's not necessarily true. There's a lot of very, very good teams who don't. And again, it's the decision you're going to have to make. However, if you are a team with a practice robot, the schedule I just presented is probably you can make a lot of adjustments to it. So we're at the 9:45 mark, so let's talk to the next section, which is driver selection. This is something that teams struggle with because there's no real manual on how to do this, and a lot of teams make decisions on their drivers for a lot of very weird ideas. So here's how driver selection is going to go. By the way, if anyone has any questions, you can either ask them directly on the YouTube channel, but the coolest way you can do it is when you opened up the YouTube channel, there was like a little link to actually watch this telecast via Google Hangouts. And if you do that, there's a little Q&A app that's open where you can put your questions right in there, and they'll be funneled over to our control center. The control center will let me see the questions, and then at the end of this, I'll try and answer some of them for you. So if you have questions, you can get them in that way. And I have no problem staying on this telecast for a while to answer questions. Of course, I can't actually see how many people are watching right now, so there might only be 2 people watching. So I'm going to feel really stupid that I've talked for 42 minutes to just 2 people. But hey, at least I'm entertaining myself, maybe. Driver selection. First is a lot like auto racing. We talked about this a little bit earlier. Events are not always won by the best robots. Sometimes it's the best drivers. These drivers are super, super crucial to what you're doing. If you're a first team with 100 kids who are working for 8 hours a day on this robot every day, there's all these hours being poured into it, you want to give the robot the best chance to succeed. So you want to have the best drivers. How do you have the best drivers? Well, you have to have a regimented selection process. I think that driver selection is not something that should be left to the last minute. A lot of teams wait till the robots are done, but drivers need to be preparing for the role, they need to be practicing, they need to be acquainted with the stuff. So I always prefer to have the drivers picked before kickoff. Again, I prefer a lot of things in life that don't always happen. This is not necessarily always a reasonable goal, but the earlier you have your drivers picked, the earlier they can get acquainted to the role, they can be groomed, they can start working with each other, and they can get practice in. Let's talk about the different roles in the drive team. I'm not going to talk about the human player because, actually I will, it's just not in the PowerPoint, but I'm not going to talk about it just yet. The driver or drivers, responsible for all robot operation. The roles are usually divided into a pilot, i.e. the person who is responsible for making the robot move around the field, and the operator, the one who's usually responsible for controlling the pickup, the arm, the shooter, and that sort of stuff. Overlap between these roles can and should exist. For example, this year, typically on 11-14, we went with a very distinct pilot and operator role, where the driver was the pilot was the only person who made the robot move and didn't do anything else, and the operator did everything else. The last couple of years, we've been giving the fire button to our driver to eliminate that unnecessary step of communication between the two of them. So the operator would tell the driver when the robot was ready to fire, i.e. it was all loaded, shooter wheels were up to speed and whatever, and the driver would fire when he was lined up perfectly with the goal. And that allowed us to make some of those crazy angled shots that they were making on Einstein that still blows my mind away. But so you can have overlaps on that sort of stuff. That's going to be very, very game dependent. The field coach or the drive coach. This is the person who's responsible for planning the match strategy before the match, communicating the match strategy during the match, and is the overall decision maker on the field. They need to understand the game inside and out. We're going to talk a lot about the drive coach in a couple slides. Should your team have one driver or two? This decision is very robot specific. Most simple robots can easily be done with one driver. Because if you think of, not last year's game isn't a very good example, but 2013, if you had one of those frisbee loaders that was just a bucket, someone drops 4 frisbees in the bucket, and then you just drive down the field and shoot, you could probably just have one driver do that because there was no intake to be operated. It's basically drive and fire. Simple enough, one driver. If you have 2 drivers in there, there's a little bit of redundancy that can lead to slowness. And first, it's had a trend. The last 3 years, the games have been shooting games. In shooting games, especially if defense is allowed on the shooter, you want to get in position and fire right away. Even a second or 2 delay can allow for you to be heavily impacted by defense. So you want to be able to fire bang right away. So that's why one driver would be good. However, complex robots typically necessitate a second driver. You don't want to try and give one student too much to do because then they're going to get overwhelmed. They're not going to be as efficient. When you have 2 drivers, communication between the drivers is absolutely critical. They need to be on the same page. Heck, probably the best 2-driver setup would be to have Siamese twins or something. Driver qualities. Here are the qualities I like to look for in a driver. There are 4 of them, and they are listed in order. Number 1 is maturity. Number 2 is communication skills. Number 3 is passion, enthusiasm, dedication, all that great stuff. And number 4, the lowest priority, is driving skill. This sounds crazy. Bear with me. Maturity. What are we looking for in maturity? First competitions are incredibly stressful. They are unlike any other high school competition aside from probably playing football in Texas. You're going to see more spectators than you're going to see anywhere else. These drivers need to be able to handle the pressure. They need to be able to handle 2,000 or, when you get to Einstein, 30,000 screaming fans. Dependability comes with maturity. Because of the amount of time that's put into this and the amount of practice that's going to go into this, you need your driver to be ready for competitions. You cannot have someone who's going to flake out and sleep in on the day of competition, who's going to just kind of say, I don't feel like doing this. You need someone who's going to be very dependable. Maturity leads to dependability. You need someone who's going to be reliable. That's going to be a mature student. So you want someone who is very mature, who can handle high-pressure situations, is responsible. They're going to be a student, but you want a student who can kind of act like an adult to a certain degree. Consider students who've been through high-level competitions in the past, i.e. varsity athletes. Varsity athletes are the ones who've done most high-pressure stuff, so they're the ones who handle this high-pressure environments a little bit better than someone who's never been on that big stage. Please remember, maturity can't be taught. You cannot take a 15-year-old on January 6th and then turn them into a mature 15-year-old on February 28th. It just doesn't happen. Maturity develops over time, and you can accelerate the rate it develops at. However, it just can't be taught. You cannot put that in someone. Communication skills. The driver has to be able to listen to instructions from the coach and follow the instructions directly. That takes a lot of maturity, but they have to be able to process. They need to not zone out. This one is If you have a driver who's kind of a lone wolf, who's not going to talk, that's a bad sign, because your driver is going to be the one who tells you, hey, the robot's pulling to the left. You need someone who's going to speak up about that, someone who is a good verbal communicator. This, again, is another skill that cannot be taught in a season. Dedication, passion, enthusiasm. A quote I love from Ralph Waldo Emerson is that nothing great was ever achieved without enthusiasm. The drivers need to be fully invested in the team. To have someone who's fully invested, they need to love it. They need to want to make the team the priority. It takes hundreds of hours to get to a high level of driving in FRC. How are you going to get a student to do that much drive? Well, it's going to be someone who loves it, who's going to want to come in, who's going to want to spend their spare time doing this. So it's really important that they love the team, they love first, they want to put the team on their back, lead the team to success, and that they have to be dedicated. They have to be willing to put the hours in. They have to be willing to put the hours in during build season to learn what's going on with the robot so they can understand when something's going wrong. This is another, they need to have an intense competitive spirit, because there are some people who, when it comes to winning, they're like, oh, I don't care if I win or lose. There's nothing wrong with that. However, if they're going to be driving your robot in competitions that you're trying to win, you want someone who's going to want to win. You're going to want someone who hates to lose. You want that intense competitive spirit. This is another skill that can't easily be taught in a season. Okay, remember that. 3 skills that we talked about that can be taught, that can't be taught. That's why these are the 3 most important ones. The last one, driving skill. Driving a first robot. Oh, I didn't italicize first. Someone's going to get mad at me for that. Driving a first robot requires top-flight hand-eye coordination. You need to be able to have a great understanding of spatial relations. What this means is your driver needs to be able to look at the field and visualize the lanes and see the gaps. They need to not only be able to see them in real time, they need to see them in the future. I know that sounds weird because I'm talking about looking into the future, but they need to be able to understand how fast everything's moving on the field and anticipate whether that lane 20 feet ahead is going to be open in 2 seconds. That's a unique skill. However, that can be developed over time in practice. Aggression. Your driver needs to be fearless. They cannot be afraid to mix it up. I would be a bad driver for a multitude of reasons, but one is that I would be worried about damaging the robot. You can't be worried about damaging the robot. You have to be able to just take it into the corner and go bang. You have to be able to take risks. You have to have the guts to take that last second shot. It is crazy aggression that you need for this. But notice how we put this after the other 3 skills. It's because this can be taught. With enough practice, anyone can develop driver skill. With the prevalence of video games today, there are lots of kids who know how to manipulate a joystick. It is not a special skill. So, I mean, I think back to the drivers we've had on 1114, and we've had some amazing ones, but the best drive team member we ever had was, in my opinion, was a she. And probably when we first did tryouts and whatever, was the least skilled we've had in terms of getting adjusted to the robot. But she was the most mature, the most dedicated, and had great communication skills. And for those reasons, those skills and her dedication, you paired all that together. She practiced and practiced and practiced because she cared so much about carrying the team on her back. She was able to become this awesome driver. But it was because of those other skills, the maturity and the communication skills, was always willing to learn, soaking things up like a sponge. Anyone can learn to drive the robot, but the other skills are just super, super key. Your driver has to be rock solid, and you're only going to find that from those previous skills. So I'll go on the record for this. I'll take a less skilled driver any day before practice starts for a more mature kid, because that mature kid can learn to become an awesome driver. Now to the drive coach. Different skill sets than the drivers. The drivers, you want them to be able to react and listen to the coach and just follow the coach's instructions, like bang, bang, bang. The coach needs to be the one who's doing the thinking. Your coach kind of needs to be brilliant. You want your like smartest person out there. Because while the drivers are watching their robot and only their robot at all times, they can't watch the whole field. There's too many things going on. They have to watch the robot. Except there's 12 robots, not 12 robots, there's 6 robots on the field, multiple game pieces, there's all sorts of stuff going on. The coach is watching all of that. The coach needs to be aware of where every robot is on the field, what they're doing, and what they're going to be doing 10 seconds from now. They're like the offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator of the football team. They're calling the plays. They're telling the drivers what to execute. They're telling them which game piece to go pick up, what strategy is being run next, which robot to play defense on. They need to be aware of all of that sort of stuff. They need to be able to calculate score quickly at a glance. Yes, there's real-time scoring for the most part, but it's not always accurate. And if it's not accurate, you need to know. You need to have an idea if you're winning or losing, because that's really going to determine what kind of strategy you're going to be running. Many matches have been won and lost by good and bad coaching. Authority. The drive coach must have the respect of his or her drivers. Now, if you have really mature drivers like we talked about earlier, they're going to be more willing to respect the coach because they know that's what they're supposed to do. Even still, it's a very important relationship between drivers and coaches. And if the drivers don't trust the coach, they're not going to have that respect and they're not going to follow the coach's instructions. So the coach needs to be authoritative, not necessarily in a yelling at the kids kind of way. That's not necessarily what you're trying to go for, but you want them to be a commanding, reassuring presence. In strategy sessions, the drive coach has to be able to get your team's perspective across. They can't be meek and just kind of let the other teams dictate what's going to happen. All 3 teams need to be active in these discussions. And unfortunately, often these discussions kind of become a battle and a negotiation. I don't like it when that happens because it would be nice if 3 teams could just work together and come up with a good plan, but sometimes it doesn't. And if you want your team to do things your way, you're going to want your coach to be able to not be pushy, but you want your coach to be able to be charismatic enough to get other people onto your page. I highly recommend you choose an adult as a coach because of all the reasons I talked about earlier. However, a lot of people disagree on this. A lot of people want to have student coaches for whatever reasons, and that's good too. But if you are going to have your student coach, you want it to be your most mature, strong-willed, and intelligent high school student who has the respect of his or her teammates. I've seen a lot of teams pick a kid as a drive coach because they're really good with strategy and they're really, really smart, but the kids on the team don't actually like the kid, so they're not going to listen to him. And it just doesn't work that way. The drive coach needs to be a leader, and leaders need to be able to command respect. So really, really think about that. If you put a drive coach in who the drivers don't respect and aren't going to listen to, you might as well have no coach in there at all because the drivers are just going to do their own thing, which is a disaster. Screen. Oh. Sorry, guys. Sorry. There we go. Almost there. Yeah. So that's kind of it about drive coaches and drive teams. How do you make these decisions? What's the decision-making process? I always say choose the drive coach first, because since the drive coach is going to be the leader of this unit, they have to be involved in the decision of the drivers because they need to pick drivers that they want to work with. Base your decision on the criteria we talked about earlier, but also chemistry. The entire drive team needs to get along. They're going to spend so much time together, and they need to be the kind of people who can complete each other's sentences and finish each other's thoughts. They need to all be on the same page. They need to be functioning like a collective, like a unit. Should you have tryouts? Of the 4 major qualities, how many of them can be evaluated by a tryout? Are you going to have a maturity tryout? Probably not, although I could think of some hilarious ways to do it. A communication tryout? A dedication tryout? Like, is that going to be like one of those endurance challenges on Survivor? I mean, yeah, you can have tryouts to figure out who has the most driver skill, but do not ever have a binding tryout based on driver skill, because the person with the most driver skill could turn out to be a complete jerk who's completely immature, and you don't want that person being your driver. Yes, it's important to evaluate driver skill, but don't let it be the end-all and be-all. You want it. it's almost like you should use driver skill as a pass-fail, whereas if the student's just completely incompetent, like me, at driving, well then yeah, okay, they're not in consideration. But if they're like, hey, they're competent, they seem to know what they're doing, we can train them, then yes, then evaluate them on the other three criteria. A really important criteria that I hadn't talked about a lot, but I guess it ties in with maturity. For better or for worse, the drive team will become the faces of your team, and your team will be known by who they are. So their personalities are very, very important. Funny anecdote on 1114. I'm sure some 1114 students aren't going to like me telling this one, but for a lot of the last 2 years, we've had the friendliest drive team in the world. They were just awesome. Everyone loved them. They made lots of friends, and it really helped how people perceived our team in the community. The 2 years prior to that, our drive team was not exactly friendly. They were very standoff. They were great people, awesome people, nice people, but at competition they were kind of standoffish, and a lot of people started to perceive our team as being standoffish. And it bothered us a bit, but not that we would have changed drivers because they weren't, personality plus. But just be very aware that your drive team is the face of your team, and people are going to perceive your team based on how your drive team acts. So one thing is they must understand gracious professionalism. They must be people who get what FIRST is about and be the kind of people that you want to put out there to, meet politicians and that sort of stuff, because the drive team is going to be the ones interacting at demos. So they have to also be great sports. Like they have to be good winners and good losers, because there's nothing more obnoxious than a team that when they win, they aren't good about winning. So you want kids who are going to respect their opponents, shake their hands, who aren't going to celebrate like tools when they win and kind of stomp in their opponents' faces, because that's just not what FIRST is about. So cool, calm, collected, professional, friendly, those are the types of people you want. Hey, that is the end of the presentation portion of this. I'm just checking my phone to see what kind of questions we have. And yeah, so that's the presentation performance, words, presentation component. If you want to find this PowerPoint, it's going to be online on our Facebook page, which FRC 1114. We'll also link to it on Twitter. This presentation is going to be automatically archived to YouTube on our channel, youtube.com/Simbotics. On our website, Simbotics.org, we have a whole bunch of old presentations on there. They're a little bit hard to find. We've lost control of our website. It is not what it once used to be. However, there's a lot of good stuff there, so there's good resources there. If you want to contact the team, you can contact us via the contact form on our webpage. You can tweet at our team, or you can message us on Facebook. If you want to contact me directly, you can do that too. My email address is there. You can find me on Twitter. I tweet a lot of awesome stuff, mainly not about FIRST, that you probably aren't even interested at all. It's mainly about basketball, but whatever. Or you can add me on Facebook or send me a message there. Don't hesitate to ask questions that way. And now, let's jump back into the Hangout here and stop screen share this infinite loop. And let's start taking some questions. All right. First question is, do you actually manage your drive team's diet, caffeine/sugar intake during competition? If so, how did you convince them to do so? That is actually true. We do manage our drive team's sugar and caffeine intake, in that they are not allowed to have any caffeine during competitions, and they're not supposed to have anything high sugar as well, like candy, chocolates, those sorts of things. We do manage that. What we found is the students tend to get a little bit excited and a little bit jittery when they're on caffeine, and there's also the caffeine crash that'll happen where, at the beginning of the day they'll have a bunch of caffeine, and then by the end of the day, they're getting ready for a match and they're crashing, which is not good at all. And also it's hard to keep their hydration levels up. So yeah, we do. How do we convince them to do so? It was very simple. We told them, if you want to be on the drive team, you have to adhere to these rules. And that has done the trick. We've never had a student who's disagreed with it. Some have been a little bit iffy about it, but they seem to be pretty good about it. And on the flip side is, on Saturday after the event, we usually buy them a lot of pop and chocolate, and they can go crazy. Next question is, how often should an FRC team meet in the off season? This really depends on what your team's trying to accomplish during the off season. For some teams, April comes or March comes because they might not even be going to championship and stop. That's fine. You got to look at your team's resources and figure out what you want to do in the off season and what's available. So it's really hard for me to answer that question of how often an FRC team should be in the off season because it's very, very team dependent and team specific. What would you do if your drive team stops getting along with each other in the middle of a competition season? That is a tough question. I think it's important to sit down I'm just trying to think if I have an anecdote that's appropriate to tell. Probably not. If the drive team stops getting along, I think the student team captain, along with the lead mentor and the drive coach, should sit down with the drive team members and try and get to the root of the problem. And I think it's important to let them know that whatever conflict they're having, the team is bigger than the conflict. And if the conflict is going to hurt the team may have to make a change. But usually these things can be worked out. Drive teams are like brothers and sisters. And if you have a great drive team, it's going to feel like a family. But as anyone who has brothers and sisters knows, they fight a lot. And this will happen naturally with a drive team because they're going to spend so much time together practicing, whatever. They're going to get sick of each other. So, it's just like what has to happen in a family. Mom and dad are going to have to step in and try and smooth things over. If the worst comes to worst, you could make a drive team change. I don't like making drive team changes at all, but if it's becoming an unpalatable situation, or if the not getting along has descended into things like bullying, which are not tolerable at all at first, then maybe a change has to be made. But I think it's really important for the leadership of the team to sit down, try and figure out what the root of the problem is, and work to solve it. What other rules, such as no caffeine, do you have for your drive team? Our rules are pretty basic. The no caffeine and the cutting down on the sugar one is one of them. They're not allowed to use the bathroom by themselves. They actually have to go with a buddy just to make sure that they get there and get back. I don't know what other things you're looking for. They have to keep their grades up, but that's a very standard thing on Simbotics. I'm trying to think if there's anything others specific to the competition. Well, no, I mean, our team has a standard code of conduct, but that code of conduct applies to everyone, including the drive team. But we have a lot of stuff about when you're at a competition, you're not only representing yourself and you're not only representing your team, but you're representing your school, your community, all the sponsors, and when your Canadian team go to champs, you're representing Canada. So you have to be on your best behavior at all times. So that's something that's very big. And it's especially big for the drive team because they're representing the team. Also, we really do encourage them to be social at competitions and to be very, very respectful of their competitors because everyone at the competition has worked super hard to get to that place, and we want to make sure that they're treating everyone with proper respect. Okay, next question. How do you balance an effective sub-team system with ensuring that students get involved where they want to and effective communication between sub-teams? How does sub-team cross-pollination work for 11-14? On 11-14, students belong to multiple sub-teams. Our team is what most people would consider a small team. This year, we're probably going to be running between 25 to 30 students. When we won Chairman's in 2012, we had 16 active students, so there had to be huge duplication. One of the things that we were very proud of when we won Chairman's is a lot of teams kind of have their Chairman's team, which is over here, and their robot team, which is over here. We had complete overlap. We actually made it a rule that if you wanted to be on the on a team leader, you have to be involved with the Chairman's team. So cross-pollination is done by having members exist on multiple teams, and that really helps with the communication. Typically, the engineering student leader, well, the last couple of years, we actually haven't even broken it down to engineering student leader and business student leader. Both kind of did both roles, but by having them involved in multiple pots, communication really improved. And also, the mentors are involved in a bunch of different areas, and that also allows for a lot of good communication. A question from Parth Patel. I wonder if this is the Parth Patel that I know. There's a lot of Parths out there. There are many ways to run a team, as you have said. How have you got everyone on the same page about running 1114 a certain way? How does everyone agree on one way? Well, I mean, we've been doing this together for a lot of years. One thing that we've been really cool in 1114, we've had a lot of consistency. And one of the ways we ensure consistency is that when students graduate, they're often invited back to be junior mentors, and then they transition into being real adult mentors. And so the consistency's been around, and our team, the way our team runs today is not the same that we ran in 2004. It's been a constant evolution over time, and so many people have been together for, as that evolution's progressed, people are always on the same page. And sometimes when people want to change how things are done, it's not that it's like A versus B sort of thing. We find ways, we're always looking to improve. So our team's constantly evolving, the methods we use to run the team are evolving, and that's how things sort of agree. Where if someone comes in and has a good idea on how to improve our team structure, we'll find a way to integrate it. What would happen if your chosen driver or operator doesn't perform well at a competition? Do you switch them out for the next competition, or do you give them another chance? In our team's history, we've never switched drivers within the season. Part of that would be luck. Part of that would be because of the way we select our drivers. By choosing mature, dependable, passionate students, we get the right people in place. But we've had times where drivers have had bad competitions. But I mean, if you're just going to switch them out like that, that doesn't install confidence in anyone, and that's going to be disheartening for the team. So we will absolutely stick it out. We don't like to ever blame drivers. One of the reasons we like having an adult coach is if things go wrong on the drive team, we blame the coach. It's the adult's responsibility, not the students. I loathe when people try and say, oh, well, that driver should have done this. There's only one person who should be criticizing the driver, and that's the drive coach. Like others can bring this information to the drive coach, but the coach needs to be handling that. So if they don't do well, we definitely will do a debrief after the competition and go over what they did incorrectly and how to improve it. And then we'll practice that a lot. And I mean, every mistake and every loss is an opportunity. You have to think of losing as an opportunity, because when you lose, it's an opportunity to figure out what you did wrong and what you can do better, and that's how you're going to peak eventually at the championship. During one of our competitions, a drive coach rudely told us that our strategy was bad and that we should just stick to defense. Oh, I just lost the question. James, can you bring that question back? There we go. During one of our competitions, a drive coach rudely told us that our strategy was bad and that we should just stick to defense. Should the drive coach also be willing to work no matter what the strategy? A little confused about this question, so I'd like it if you could pose a follow-up question. Was that told to you by a drive coach from another team, or was that told to you by your own drive coach? So if you can post a follow-up question, Tim Alum, I'll be sure to answer it when that follow-up question comes up. Next question, serious question. How many drive coaches has 1114 had since you joined in 2004? What prompted the changes, if any? Do you guys purposefully stagger a drive team, meaning you never load a drive team with 3 freshmen or 3 seniors? Well, a couple questions in there, and that's a good question. I was the drive coach in 2004. I did not drive coach after that because I started emceeing competitions, and I decided to do that instead of drive coaching. Probably a mistake, but hey. 2005, Derek Bissett came in and became our drive coach. He was also our lead designer at the time, and he was phenomenal, and he coached us from 2005 to 2008. But then Derek and his wife had some kids, so that became a priority for him. So then Kyle Willick, the commander, took over. Commander coached from 2009 to 2013. Commander was also phenomenal, ridiculous amount of regionals. The commander then last year started his master's in quantum computing at the University of Waterloo, so that kind of kept him a little bit busy. So Ben Bennett took over as our drive coach, and he's now our current drive coach. Ben's also our lead mechanical designer. And so the changes basically came each time a drive coach stepped down. They wanted to move on and focus on other things, and so we found another drive coach. We're very lucky in 1114 in that we have a lot of people who are could be talented drive coaches, and we have a lot of people who've been on drive teams for both 1114 and for other teams. So We've been lucky in that respect. But the changes were never prompted because it's like, oh, we want to have a better coach. We've been very lucky. I mean, Derek, Kyle, and Ben are three of the best coaches I've ever seen, and I thought I was all right. So hopefully the rest of the team thought I was all right too. But so the changes were for that reason. Do you guys purposely stagger a drive team, meaning you never load a drive team with 3 freshmen and 3 seniors? In a perfect world, we would never have a drive team. Not that we would never have a drive team with 3 seniors, but we wouldn't bring 3 seniors in to a drive team. We've never driven before, but a lot of it is just based on timing. This year, our drive team is probably going to have some new members. Well, it's definitely going to have 2 members because 2 of them graduated. Graham, our operator, and JT, our jumping human player, both graduated, so we're going to have to fill those roles. But if there's a senior on our team who is really into it, maybe we would give him that role. But definitely precedence would be given to a younger student just because we can have them for a longer time, and we do like to keep that amount of experience. Okay, Tim, thanks for the follow-up question. That another team's drive coach basically told you guys, hey, your robot's no good and we want you just to play defense. So here's the thing. In a match, the 3 teams need to agree on what is going to be done. That is difficult to get that sort of consensus. Sometimes it's not possible. But before the match starts, there has to be a consensus. Whatever is the agreed upon consensus before the match starts is what you need to do in the match, because anything less is unfair to your partners. So even if you don't like what's been agreed upon, you need to do it. Now, that being said, you have every right to stand up for your team during the pre-match discussions and say, hey, we don't want to do that role. You should do that. You want to do what you think is best for your team. But before the match starts, all 3 teams need to be on the same page and they have to come to that consensus. So there's no rule on who dictates strategy during qualification matches. You just kind of have to come to that sort of consensus. And it's important to try and build consensus, but because if you have 3 teams who are trying 3 distinct strategies during a match, your opponents are most likely going to win because they are going to be more cohesive and have a better plan, and there's going to be less overlap and less duplication. So I'm sorry that you had that experience. Unfortunately, it's something that happens a lot. I've heard some horror stories from championships this past year of some really jerk-like moves that was pulled by some teams, and some teams were pretty offended by it. So I'm sorry that that's happened. And the stuff I heard at championships and eliminations, which is even worse. But yeah, I'm really sorry that you have to deal with that, but it's important to try and get all the teams on the same page for strategy and then to make something work during the match. What's the best way to recruit mentors? We're at a very low number at the moment and starting to fret a bit. That's a good question. The best way to recruit mentors, well, is to look at your sponsor base. The best sponsors in FIRST don't just provide money. They provide in-kind services and they provide mentorship. That's how our team started. We were sponsored by GM. We still are sponsored by GM, and GM provided a lot of mentors to us. And then from there, our team has grown and branched off in different ways. But your sponsors are a great place to approach your mentors. Parents. A lot of the times you will have parents on your team who have a lot of experience. Some of them will run their own business. Some of them will be engineers. Some of them will be farmers who are great at fixing tractors. You know, there's just lots of cool people. So you want to look at your parents that way. If that doesn't work, you want to try and find organizations who would be interested in mentoring. So maybe do a presentation for your local chapter of the Society of Mechanical Engineers or something along those lines to try and recruit mentors. Doing public demonstrations is a good one where you talk about the need for mentors. Making a promotional video that you share via social media, that you get some people to try and go viral in certain communities saying, hey, we're team ABCD and we're looking for mentors, come help us. And you know, you do something like that, that might be a way to hook them. Probably the best way, this is going to be hard for the 2015 season, but in the 2015 season is invite some prospective mentors to the competition so they can see what it's all about. Because if they see what it's all about, they might realize, whoa, this is super cool, I want to do this. there are so many engineers out there who dreamed about being on a Formula One or NASCAR team. That's like the holy grail. But, there's very few spots in the world like that. But FIRST is as close as you get to some experience like that. So if you get the professional entrants seeing that side of things, they might get really hooked. So trying to lure them to competitions is another good way. What beneficial knowledge and experience can be taken from other robotics competitions, VRC, for example, to give a team a head start in the startup of an FRC team? I feel like that question was seeded by one of my bosses at VEX. That's hilarious. Yeah, actually, there are a bunch of teams in Ontario specifically, 1114 being one of them. We use the VEX Robotics competition as a training ground for our FRC team. It's almost like our junior varsity to the FRC being varsity. So we train the kids on VEX, which is an easier program. They go through VEX grade 9 and 10, and they learn lots of stuff about strategic design, hands-on things about making design trade-offs, and they become much more useful participants in FRC. They also learn how to strategize, they learn how to do alliance selection, they learn how to scout. All those things that take experience to be really good at in FRC, they learn while doing VEX. And so VEX isn't the only way to do this. FTC, having kids who've done FLL, VEX Q Challenge, any sort of competitive experience in competition robotics is going to be good for FRC. So, yeah. We're entering our third year, and a big thing we're working on is keeping students interested during the preseason. Do you have any tips for keeping interest amongst the new members during the preseason? Sure, see the previous question and do VEX or do FTC. Like, get them doing stuff. Like, what are your teams doing during the preseason? Like, that's a really important thing to ask, because there's a lot of teams who say, oh, well, no one's excited, no one's motivated to do anything in the preseason, but all you're doing in the preseason is like safety tests and studying the YPP protocol. So like, that's not exciting. So yeah, of course you're going to lose interest that way. But I mean, the way you keep things interesting is you have to keep things dynamic. You need to make sure that they have goals and projects that they're working on. Students don't like doing busy work. They don't like showing up to meetings. There's nothing to do. You have to find a way to keep them engaged. All right, what is a good way to limit the size of an FRC team if you have too many people apply to join? Yeah, that's a very good question. So a lot of teams basically say, hey, we only want to have 60 kids on the team, but we have 120 applicants. So you can do things one of two ways. One, you can let natural attrition take people out, where I know in 11-14 we always have more like 40 or 50 kids to start the season, and by the time January comes around only 25 are left because people naturally fade out. That's one way. Or you could make cuts. I mean, you could make them do an application process where you're looking for certain skill sets, and if students don't have those skill sets, you don't let them in. It's not ideal because with FIRST you want to try and get as many people the experience. On the other hand, there's lots of programs out there that are very successful with making cuts. What would the ideal team size be? There is no ideal team size. So much of it is a sliding scale. I mean, based on what we talked about earlier. We like running with 25 to 30, but I know other teams that swear by running with twice as many kids because they have twice as many projects to do. So I think the way you determine the ideal team size is to set out a bunch of goals of what your team wants to accomplish for the season. So, if you outline, then you can identify how many students you're going to need to accomplish each goal and then come up with an ideal team size from there. But there's definitely no universal ideal team size. Would you recommend having a separate strategist to help the coach and drivers if they are particularly talented at strategy and working with other teams? Absolutely. I like to call that the role of the tactician, and that's a huge one because the drive team is going to spend a lot of time in the pit getting the robot ready for matches, and they're in between matches all the time. The drive coach is always in between matches, and there's stuff going on. Having a tactician who can be the liaison to the coach and give the coach feedback on what's happened in the matches and give them insight on what's going to happen in the future matches is a natural, and that's a really good way to get people involved in competition. So having that sort of tactical role, and that'll be part of your strategy and analytics team, is not just particularly helpful, it is essential. So if you have the students do it, go for it. Okay. How would you deal with the drive team members starting to do pit work due to their heavy involvement during build season? I.e., the drive team members can fix the robot better than the pit members, and the pit members feel like they aren't doing anything. I mean, that's a very team-specific sort of thing. Sometimes there's some teams which will delineate the role where the drive team and the pit crew are completely separate, and the drive team is not supposed to work on the robot. If that's actually the case, then that's the way the team's been set up, and the drive team needs to step aside. However, if the drive team is part of the pit crew, then they should be involved. So if you have a situation where your team has identified, these are the 6 people on the pit crew, and these are the people who are working on the robot, then that's the way it should be. The team's identified this and set it up that way for a reason. Now, if the drive team thinks there's a particular reason they need to be making a change or making a fix, they need to talk to the team leadership and discuss that with them, try and get that sorted out. But you really can't, when you get to a competition and the roles have been assigned, you can't really be changing those roles up. How would you recommend planning for strategies that will be discussed at competition and partners that refuse to follow them? Well, it's twofold. If you're trying to deal with the pre-match stuff, if you have a partner who's just constantly disagreeing, you have to figure out why they're disagreeing. Why are they so against running the strategy you want to run? Is it because maybe you're missing something? Or is it just because they're jerks? You need to sort of figure that sort of stuff out. Regardless, if you know that they don't want to do your strategy, you need to find one that they want to do. Because a strategy that, an optimal strategy that only 2 of the 3 teams want to run is no longer going to be optimal. However, a less optimal strategy that 3 teams want to run is going to be the better one. So you need to find a strategy that's going to work for all 3 teams. If this is during the match, how do you prepare for a team deviating strategy during the match? We'll talk about this more in the 3rd seminar where we talk about match planning and execution, but you always need to have contingency plans. And one of your contingency plans has to be what to do if team B or team C breaks off the strategy. So you need to have a strategy backup for if they start going off on their own. So for example, this year would be a perfect one where, like, say team A is supposed to be the inbounder, but they are on the wrong side of the field. Well, your strategy then is to skip them in the cycle. Team B goes to inbound, and now Team C is finishing, and then you make that sort of change. How do you handle a situation where you don't have enough students to fill multiple sub-teams, and the kids have to multitask? I think you look at your build season schedule, and you try and attack things as linearly as possible. So you say, okay, so if your mechanical kids and your electrical kids are highly duplicated, it's like, okay, let's spend as much time focusing everyone on mechanical, and then let's go linearly in a line to do electrical. So before you would try and do some parallel processing, now you're going to have to break the parallel processing up and try and do things more in serial. What do you do at your first meeting to make students want to come to the second? I haven't been to an 11-14 first meeting in a while, but what the kind of gist is at the first meeting is you talk about what first is about and what the team is about, and you try and do things in an exciting manner. You don't go into the nitty-gritty boring stuff, but you play some videos, play the Morgan Freeman first video, play some of your old match video, get them excited about competition. That first meeting is all about hype and generating excitement. Sorry, my throat going here. Recommended something for internal team communications. Our team with near 60 members tends to struggle with that. We like to use Google Groups, Google email distribution lists. That seems to work pretty well for us. A few years ago, I would have said Facebook was the way to go because everyone seemed to communicate more via Facebook than email, but now more and more teenagers are using Facebook less and less. Texting groups, WhatsApp, BBM groups might be a way, but that can be a little bit chaotic with everything coming to the phone. I think it's important to, I've always liked email groups and just making kids check their email once a day. I think it's a good habit to get into, but if that's not working, you might want to try something via social media. Okay, Follow-up consensus question. My only very positive direct personal experience with 1114 was being convinced and becoming excited about playing a very different strategy by an 1114 student in BRC. They seemed excited beyond words to be working with us, even with our subpar robot. I've noticed that 1114 consistently gets the most out of their alliance partners, no matter how the quality. How do you tailor this process to be as positive as it is, rather than taking the form of an argument or debate? When I have strategy discussions, the first thing I always ask the other teams is, I will never walk in and say, hey, this is what we're going to do and this is what you guys are going to do. My question is always going to be, hey, what do you guys want to do this match? Because I want to figure out what my partners want to do. Because what they want to do is probably what they're best at. And I want them doing what they're best at. So I'm going to have an idea of what I think they're best at based on my scouting, but I want to know what they're comfortable with and what they want to do. And hopefully, from hearing what they want to do, we can then tailor our strategy to complement what they're trying to do. So we're always looking to try and work on that end. But if we have an unconventional strategy that we want to try, we want to get the buy-in from the other teams. We never want to be dictating strategy to other teams. We want to talk to them as in, hey, here's a strategy. What do you think about it? And we try and get them excited about it. So we try and show off our excitement about it. We talk about what we see the potential in it as, hoping to get them to see the potential. So it's always about conversation and consensus, and it's never about giving orders. Because if you think about it, a lot of times you're talking strategy and you're meeting people that you've never met before. Are you going to walk up to a stranger and say, hey, you need to do this, this, and this? Are you going to walk up to a stranger who's just spent 6 weeks of blood, sweat, and tears building a robot, and you're going to tell them how they have to use their robot? I mean, that's just not a good way to get people excited about a match. So it's about trying to build consensus. It's about working with each other. I do not like people that come in barking orders, strategy stuff. It drives me crazy. At championships, it gets really confusing scouting for almost 100 teams. How does 1114 manage scouting, particularly at high occupancy events? Well, you ought to take things one match at a time. And by doing things one match at a time, we like to have at least 6 students on scouting, 1 watching every robot. On top, so those ones will be responsible for direct data collection. We'll have other tacticians and strategists who are watching each match, and they're watching more of the big picture thing. They're looking for specific things. Some will be looking for second robots for an alliance. Some will be watching to see the flow of scoring within the match. So you're looking, basically you want to get as many people on scouting as possible, and you want to use that divide and conquer sort of method. So for us, scouting 100 teams is not that different than scouting 30 teams. Now, when you're doing your analysis, it becomes a lot harder, because if you try and analyze all 100 teams at once when making a pick list, it's overwhelming. You can't do it. So we try and find ways to pare down that 100 based on minimum qualifying requirements of certain things that they've done. You know, you have to have picked up a ball once. At championship, that'll actually rule out some teams. How do we get students to understand the importance of scouting? Well, like anything with students, it comes down to leadership. You need to show the students on your team that the leadership respects scouting. So many teams that come to me are like, oh, no one wants to scout on our team. Well, the reason a lot of them don't want to scout is that the team doesn't actually take the scouting data seriously. If students who are scouting just feel like doing busy work, they're not going to think that they're important. So they aren't going to take it seriously, and they aren't going to do a job. As such, you need to make sure your student leadership and your mentor leadership believes in scouting, cares about scouting, and creates a culture where scouting is respected. So that's kind of the way to understand the importance. You have to make it important and make it a priority. Not that it's just data that's going to be collected that no one's going to use. I don't think there's anything more disheartening for a scout than to sit in the stands for 8 hours collecting data without taking a single bathroom break, and then finding out that the drive team and the strategists never even looked at the data. Like, I mean, I would walk out. Like, that's a bummer. How do you get your scouting information from your scouts to your drive team? I've heard 33 has a runner bring an index card of information to the gym. We basically do the same thing, except it's not on an index card. It's usually on a piece of notebook paper. Our lead scout will typically take a list of the teams that we're playing with in our upcoming match, write them on the notepad, and then write a couple notes, some stats, rip it on a piece of paper, and it'll be given to a runner who will take it to our drive coach. Sometimes if there's enough time between matches, the drive coach will come into the stands, have a seat with the scouts, talk a little bit about the next match, and then head on down. But it's a very antiquated system. Antiquated, rather. How do you start to get returning members enthusiastic about the coming season and get them back into the robotics mood? Well, with the returning members, I try and figure out what excited them the most the previous season. So show them videos from your class, your best matches from competition, to remember that energy and excitement level. Show them your chairman's video. Show them all the awesome stuff that happened last year to trigger the memories of, oh yeah, that's why I love robots. So for returning members, you want to show them what was awesome last year. And again, your leadership has to be enthusiastic. If your leadership's enthusiastic, the students will follow. The students, the sub-team, whatever. What are your opinions on paper scouting versus electronics or other? Do you take the aid of an analytical tool to help make decisions or just use raw data? Electronic scouting, I prefer paper scouting because I'm just an old-fashioned person. We do our scouting on paper. It goes into binders. The binders are inputted into Excel. Then we manipulate via pivot tables and the such. So, I mean, if you have a really cool scouting system, that's awesome. But there's more failure points with electronic scouting systems because you have to deal with network connection and battery charge and all the database, blah, blah, blah. With paper stuff, like, our biggest scouting difficulty when we're doing paper scouting is kids dropping pens under the bleachers or dropping the scouting binder under the bleachers. So that's why I prefer paper for that reason. Analytic tools, yeah, we do. It's mainly just taking the raw data and converting it into averages, looking at standard deviations, coming up with some custom metrics, which we'll talk about in the scouting presentation. But looking at just pure raw data is sometimes not usually the best thing. Next question. I've noticed that different driving styles correspond to different jobs on the team. CAD, programming, building. These styles seem to coordinate with different games. Is that something that should be considered? I'm trying to think if I've noticed that correlation. I mean, if you notice, I wouldn't use it as a uniform rule because the sample size of data you're looking at is probably pretty small. Well, it has to be pretty small. It can't be large. There's only, you play a season. That's it. So, but if you have noticed those sorts of trends, then sure, absolutely use them in your decision making. I just haven't necessarily seen them. So, like, I've never been able to look at a game and be like, oh yeah, this is definitely a game where a cadder is going to be a good driver. But if you have noticed a skill set for that, then yeah, that could work. Okay, through these sort of questions. Several times in the past, our team has come to an impasse between leadership and experience. When a decision needs to be made, who should make the decision? The person in the leadership position or the person with the experience? I'm curious as to why the person in the leadership position is not a person with experience. I mean, my answer to that question is that your leaders should be experienced and should have an understanding of how FRC works. So, again, all decisions should be tried to be achieved via consensus. It's not that person A makes a decision or person B makes a decision. You always want to try and achieve consensus. However, if you cannot achieve consensus within your team, you've created a leadership structure for a reason. So trust the people you've appointed as leaders and let them make the decisions at that point. But you should always try and get to consensus beforehand. Okay. When you gain a large number of members at the beginning of the season, what do you do to incorporate them into the team with the old members? Well, if you're going to take in a large number of new members, you want to be able to have stuff for them to do when the season starts. So if you're one of those teams with 120 people, I think it's very important to try and be involved in another program like VEX or FTC and involve students that way. Maybe mentoring FLL or VEX IQ. But you need to, the only way you're going to incorporate them into the team is to have tasks for them. Maybe do an off-season event where you say that only new members are going to work on the robot at the off-season event. Only new members are going to drive, and the older members are going to be act as mentors and act as guides for the students. But try and find projects that will allow them to work alongside the veteran members to gain from their experience, and also work to be able to step into roles on their own where they're not just being overshadowed by the existing members. How do you stop people from going too quickly into the design/function of the robot right after kickoff rather than focusing on its strategy? I mean, it's just got to be a team rule on something like this. You got to say, okay, guys, first 3 days, we're just doing brainstorming. We're doing nothing else. And put all the tools away, lock the shop door, and just stick to what's actually happening. So you basically have to say, this is strategy days, this is all that's going to happen. We are not going to build anything until we establish a priority list. So it's got to be a very firm rule on that sort of thing. In the pits, there are situations where it becomes too full and clustered. There simply isn't room for you to try and work or observe. Other than pit scheduling, what do you suggest the members left out do? So if your pit has gotten too cluttered, it's important to then talk to your, the mentor leader for the pit and say, hey, what should I be doing right now? I don't want to be in the pit right now because it's a little bit too cluttered. And see what your mentor leader or your student team leader wants you to do. Pit scouting is a good thing you can do, but one of the best things you should be doing is go help other teams. I know that's one thing that we're very big on in 1114, that our pit crew members are responsible for helping other teams. But you walk to the pits and talk to other teams and see who needs help and help them out. If you go to the inspection table and say, hey, what teams need some help? Go out and find those teams and help them out, because teams always need help at competitions. So it's really important that if you feel that your pit's too crowded and you can't get anything done there, to go out and seek someone else out, try and lend a hand. How does 1114 decide who is on drive team? Those 6 slides I talked about earlier was exactly how we do it. The mentors it's a rotating process. So for the 2015 season, we started talking about potential drivers probably at some point during the 2014 season, because we knew that we were going to have kids from the 2014 drive team graduated. So we were constantly evaluating every student on the team, looking at their maturity, their dedication to the team, and their communication skills. So we kind of created a short list in that effect. We then, after the season, we invited any students who were interested in being on our drive team for our off-season event at IRI to email the mentors. And from there, we took a list of the students who were interested, and then we kind of evaluated them on those criteria that we had set out before, and that's how we made the decision. There were definitely no driver tryouts involved in this process. That's how we chose for IRI. As for who we're going to have drive in the season, we have another off-season event coming up. We're going to be evaluating multiple drivers. We're going to see, again, we're not actually evaluating how they perform in those matches. We're more evaluating how they react to pressure, how they communicate with their teammates, how they handle themselves, and all those sorts of fun things. And probably come the middle of January, we'll make a decision based on the criteria that we've set out. Do y'all look at student leadership roles as something separate from the drive team, i.e. a lead student can't drive because of his or her role? No, our team is too small for us to do that sort of thing, so the team president can absolutely be on the drive team and has been in the past and will continue to be in the future. What student-to-mentor ratio do you think is most effective? What ratios have you seen to be effective, for example, on 1114? More mentors could mean more work done by mentors, but the inverse may require students without experience doing tasks. We used to strive to have a mentor for every student. We're at the point right now where basically we have a team of about 24 with about 12 regular mentors, so it's about 1 mentor for every 2 students. Now, a lot of the time during build weekends, there will be 7 mentors sitting around in a room talking about football while the kids are working in the shop, because they don't necessarily need to be hovered over by the mentors. We do like to try and get the students working as much as they can on their own, but the mentors are there to set direction provide leadership and to share experience. So we want to make sure that if the students can do the job, they are doing the job. And if the students can't do the job, then the mentor is doing the job with a student working with them. One neat thing about our team, and most people don't know this about how we operate, the mentors are only in the school basically from Friday night at 5 p.m. until Sunday at 5 p.m. So during the week, the students are very much on their own with the teachers. So on Sundays, we'll kind of set a priority list of things for the students to try and get done during the week, and then they'll work on those on their own. They'll send us video, they'll send us pictures via Dropbox so we can see what's happening, and then we can kind of give them ideas and such. But the hands-on mentorship really goes on the weekends. But we have this program on our team called Big Simbot, Little Simbot, and we kind of got away from it last year, which was a mistake. But it's basically where each student is assigned to a mentor, where that student knows that that's the one mentor they can go to if they're struggling on the team, or if they need help with homework, if they need help trying to decide what university to go to, how to do a job application, and that sort of stuff. So students can get really hands-on direct mentorship, but also form a very personal bond with one mentor. And what that sort of relationship allows for is that often on our team, before we had Big Simbot, Little Simbot, the students who got the most mentoring were the students who were very extroverted and would ask for help. Be like, hey, Mr. Mentor, help me with this. Hey, Mr. Mentor, help me with that. While our introverted students kind of slunk to the background and didn't get as much attention from the mentors. But by having a program like Big Simbot, Little Simbot, the mentor then knows to seek out his little Simbot to make sure that he or she's getting involved. And so we've seen some very introverted students end up becoming like chairman's presenters and Olympic medalists because of this. So kind of cool. We have a team of around 60 students with 2 mentors. We're looking to recruit new mentors, and we're in the Toronto area. Our current mentors are teachers at our school, and we want to branch out of that. Well, the Toronto area is rich with a lot of potential mentors because there are a huge amount of FIRST alumni in the Toronto area who have been on FIRST teams and they've been successful on those FIRST teams, but now they graduated high school, and they're looking for something different to do. They kind of want to mentor outside of their comfort zone. So I bet you if you posted on the FIRST Robotics Canada Facebook page and said, hey, we're team blah, 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 and we're looking for mentors in the Toronto area. Are there any FIRST alums that would be interested in helping us out? You'd probably find some people who would want to do that. So I think that's a neat approach that's very Toronto specific. Currently, we are attempting to raise as much money as possible. What do you find to be the most effective way to raise money? Like I said, I'm not a fundraising expert, but one tip that I've seen that's worked out is that every kid on your team, well, actually, I'm not sure if you're in Canada or the US, but most people should have a family doctor, a dentist, an eye doctor, and the such and such, who usually you could probably go to and be like, hey, family doctor, are you willing to sponsor my robotics team for $500? And if you can get, like just 8 kids to get $500 checks like that, that's $4,000 right there. That's a regional registration. So approaches like that are good ones. Talk to people that your parents do business with regularly, plumbers, the contractors, people with small businesses who would be okay with dropping $200, $300 to sponsor the team. Those things add up really, really quickly, as opposed to trying to find one big $40,000 sponsor. So trying to get those not small, like we're not talking $20, $30 donations. You're talking donations of like the $500 stuff. Those will add up pretty quickly. Okay, it looks like we're coming down towards the end of the questions here. What are some tools you would recommend for a second year? In our first year, all we had was a jack saw to cut aluminum, nothing else. What building materials would you recommend for the same team? If you'd like, how about you email that question to our team or send a message to our Facebook, and then I will pass that question on to one of our more mechanically inclined mentors who can give you a more detailed response, a better response than I could, because I am not good with tools. So guys, it's about 10:50. It looks like that is the end of Simbot Seminar Series number 1, Running a Team. I'd like to invite all of you to join us next week, same time, 9 o'clock, for for our second seminar, which is going to be on strategic design. This is my favorite one. Spread the word on this. And this is probably the most important one for teams to take a look at because it's something that most teams kind of miss out on, and it's very important on really improving the robot quality that you've got going on. So I want to thank everyone again for tuning in. I just want to, and good luck. Robots are awesome. FRST is cool stuff. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you next week. Night.